wanted to clarify something. The title of the talk is called Leave Actually. If you're not familiar, there is a movie, a British movie called Love Actually. And so we changed the word love to leave, but we're talking about paternity leave, not the whole Brexit thing about leaving the EU. That talk will happen at an open space later today. So I wanted to introduce my co-speaker, Nicole. She really is quite awesome. In addition to giving this talk, you are pretty loud, buddy. I'm speaking. Nicole is an Ironman, which means she has run and walked and biked and sailed and swam like 26 miles all in the same day. In addition to that, she also does software engineering. So, and then there's me. I am 24/7 dad ops, doing that now still. And I'm also a software engineer. And I've done operation tools and dev tools and stuff like that. We're gonna start with a little story. Hopefully we won't lull you into a sleep. 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, my wife, seated over there, and I decided to have a baby, another baby, because we wanted some redundancy. So we went to the hospital, and we said we would like to have a baby, and then someone went into labor. I won't say who, because we practice blameless postpartums. And we had baby Rohan. Sorry, only I can see that, but it's also that. So I went on leave, and we did what you do when you have a new kid, which is you spam all your friends and family. And I spammed my coworkers, and I said, hey, I'm on parental leave. Are you going to be distracting the whole talk? They're just going to listen to you the whole time instead of me or Nicole. It is you. It is you. Not right out of the womb, but later after some photoshopping. So I emailed my work and said, I said I'm going to be on leave for a few weeks, and I did what we did, which is we bond with the child. I told CB not to eat his brother. I told our cat not to eat the brother, and it worked because he's still around. And I read up on some books. I suggest you guys get this on Amazon. If you've got your laptops or your phones out, just do it now. We'll wait. It's quite a good book on parenting. So at the end of the leave, I had to make that decision that all us fathers make. So I don't know if how many of you are a dad? Okay. The moms might not get this, but when you go on paternity leave, you kind of get these hormones that make you just want to stay at home all the time and not go back to your career. And I had those, and I had to finally confront, whether I would go back into the workforce, whether I would go and get that career. And then I got the hospital bill that told me that I should really go get that career again. And I was like, yeah, I guess I'm going to go have it all. And so the next day I got on board a train. I wasn't getting a lot of sleep, so the train may not have looked actually like this. It may have had a non-dinosaur engineer, who knows? Who can really tell? But I was like, this is exciting. I'm going to get on a train, and I'm going to go have it all, a career and a family. And while I'm at it, maybe I'll get a nap. And so I napped for about an hour or so, got into the city, which is San Francisco, from those of you out of town, San Francisco. And I walked into my work, met my coworkers. And you guys are just playing. Vendors, you guys will love this talk. So yeah, I went to meet my coworkers, and one of them, greeted me and said, "Hey, Dave, you're back already." And I was like, "Yeah, it really is already. paternal leave is measured in weeks at this company and many others. And at a lot of other companies, maternal leave is more than weeks, it's often months. And there is an unbalanced aspect to this. In this graph, you can see about 2/3 of those companies have unbalanced leaves, and you might think, well, what's the problem with that? The problem is it means, poor Katie, instead of having anybody, being a co-parent at the house, was only having a co-parent for about 4 weeks, and then she was on her own. And that's often the case with a lot of leave. So this is one way, as I like to say, this is one way that patriarchy is unfriendly to both men and women equally. After I met with my friends, I met with my boss. This is from Office Space. It's still kind of relevant 20 years later. And he was known for giving me lots of saying lots of nice things that you would maybe insert into a talk to share with people. And so for him it was, "Hey Dave, how was your vacation?" And I said, "Wow, I just finished a 1-hour nap, which was probably the best hour of sleep I've had in about a month. So no, I'm kind of on the ball now. I did not have a vacation. There was no palm trees, there's pretty skies. I live in California, but it wasn't like this. No, this is what we had. We had parental leave. And if you're not familiar with what babies go through, they get overstimulated, they get teary-eyed. They're a lot like this. This is familiar, right? Same. Overstimulated, too many interactions. Uh-oh, the server crapped the bed. Uh-oh, the baby crapped itself. Same. Time to put him to sleep, maybe, right? Let's let those services just put them down for a bit. And one more, same, right? Who hasn't been woken up in the middle of the night by either pager duty or a baby? Probably very few people aren't in either camp. So yeah, parental leave was not a vacation. This was kind of lost on my boss. I remember him talking to myself and our direct manager, and he said, "Hey Dave, you're not in the office enough." And I asked my direct manager, I'm like, "I'm not in the office enough, what do you mean by that?" And my direct manager's like, "No Dave, you're in the office quite a bit, you do good work, you're great. I think our boss just forgot that you were on leave for a few weeks." And I was like, "Whoa, wait, you're saying that me taking leave means I'm now an absentee employee?" So I did what, I'm an engineer, Nicole's an engineer. You get into these situations and you flip tables. And then after some hindsight, you say, well, maybe we should start measuring the problem. And that's what we did. We started measuring the problem. We started a couple of surveys to see how companies are handling their leave and how many people are actually using that leave. So I'm going to pass it over to Nicole. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave, for the story. So I'm going to talk about kind of what data we collected in our survey and some of the interesting insights we drew. But I'm going to take a few minutes to just talk about why we think leave is really important before I get into that. So we think it's a lot nicer for parents. It's better for children. It actually is better for the companies who are paying for the leave, which sounds a little counterintuitive, but I'll talk about that in a minute. And we think that it can help diversity. So I think that Dave's story definitely illustrated how it's a lot nicer for parents, mothers, and fathers if they have adequate time to bond with babies. So I won't get too much into that one. I think it's a little self-explanatory. But there's some interesting studies that point to how it turns out that there's a lot better outcomes for children whose parents take longer leave. So one study found that among parents who took longer leave, there were lower infant mortality rates along with lower death rates in young children. So it's those early interactions are really important for early outcomes and success rates. Also, an interesting study found that among mothers who took paid maternity leave that their children had, yes, very cute, had higher IQs, higher education levels later in life, and then even much further down the road had higher earning potential. So another study pointed to how this is important for fathers too. So we often think of mothers as a primary caretaker, but a study found that when fathers took 2 or more weeks of paternity leave, that they had more interactions with their children 9 months down the road. So these early, baby bonding, early time with their children really makes a big difference on how the kid's going to turn out later in life. And so we think, it's much nicer for parents and kids. It sounds important, it's the right thing to do, but it can be difficult for companies to balance, doing the right thing versus answering to shareholders, answering to investors. It is, when you think about just paying someone to be out on leave, it's expensive, but it actually turns out that it can save a lot of money. So 25 to 75% is about what it costs to replace an employee that's left your company. So 25% would be a really conservative estimate of that employee's compensation yearly. Now that would be maybe for like an entry-level employee if you got really lucky, found someone quickly, and hired right away. But if you think about all of the screening and paying a headhunter, also interviews, whittling it down to the right candidate, getting them on board, it's a very costly process, and it's really closer maybe to 50 to 75% of that employee's yearly compensation. So when you lose that employee and you have to replace them, it ends up costing a lot more than if you just kept the employee and paid them for adequate leave. And Google found in 2007, when they increased their paid maternity leave from 12 to 18 weeks, that the attrition rate among new moms dropped by 50%. So that's a huge bump in retention and a huge savings. And then even since then, since they increased their policy, they've again increased their policy for not just mothers, but fathers too. And they're definitely finding they don't just make decisions for fun. They look at the data and look at what makes sense. And it's not just Google, other companies have found this too. So we think that this can also help with diversity, which we know is a problem in tech. Among the entire workforce, 47% are women and 53% are men. So it's pretty evenly split in the entire workforce. Now then, when it comes to the computing workforce, computer information, IT, computer science, it's about 27% women. And then when we get a little more specific into system administrators, it's about 13% women. And then among those who identify themselves as being in DevOps roles, only about 5% also identify themselves as women. So we know we have a big gap there. And one reason is because women leave these fields at a greater rate than men do. And while there's more than many reasons why men might leave, or women might leave at a greater rate than men, one reason is definitely inadequate maternity leave. So anything that can be done to kind of keep women in the workforce can help bridge that gap. Also, and not just in terms of gender this can also help with age diversity. So, your new parent and your second-time parent, they're a little bit older than your fresh college graduate. So it's nice not only to have men and women, but to have different ages represented in your workforce as well. So anything that can happen to keep more people around is definitely important. And then we know that the pay gap is still a very real issue in the United States. And we think that this can also be addressed with more equal leave policies. So again, it's not just nice for women to have more time. It's important for men and women to be able to share roles equally at home. A study in Sweden found that for every month extra of paternity leave that fathers took, mothers made an extra 7% in their salary. So that's a pretty huge difference that can really help bridge this gap. And we think that's because, when dads are forced back into the workplace early, then, moms have to kind of assume that lead parent role and take on more work at home. And then, they end up with more responsibilities at home, and it's hard to share equal responsibilities in the workplace as well. So it makes it more difficult to share equally in both places. So this is why we think that equal leave is really important. So then, this is why we collected the data. We think it's really important for a lot of reasons. And so here's what we found so far. We collected mostly just tech companies to start, because we think tech companies are really responsive and receptive to not only doing the right thing, but being really competitive in their benefits packages. So that's where we started, and also we work in tech companies. So we're a little selfish, I guess, in that way. Now we got 147 total responses so far, but we feel like we're just getting started there. And out of those 147 responses, we collected 120 unique company data points. So we found that on average, companies gave about 12 weeks of paid maternity leave, and then for paternity and adoptive leave, it was around 9 weeks each. And we also thought it would be interesting not just to collect how many weeks people got paid for, but how many weeks did people take. So we think for various reasons, people may take more or less leave than what they get paid for. So for the mothers that responded to our survey, this is still a pretty small data set, which we're hoping to grow, but there were about 30 mothers that responded that they had taken leave at their company. And of those mothers, they had taken on average about 14 weeks of paid leave. Of just any leave at all. And then of those mothers, they only got paid at their companies for about 7 weeks. So they took about twice as much as what they got paid for, just again for this small subset of people. And then fathers who responded to their survey that they had taken leave, they took a little over 7 weeks, and they got paid on average for a little less than 8 weeks. So they took about 95% of what they got paid for. So moms were taking a lot more, and dads are pretty much just taking what they get paid for. So then, very interesting, of course, is who gives the best leave, because we all want to work for these companies, especially when we're going to have kids, right? So Netflix is definitely a standout. Within the first year of your new child, you can take up to 52 weeks. So, however much you need in that first year, you can take 100% paid. Then we had a few others coming in right behind, all tied, right around 6 months, almost equal across the board at Spotify, Organizer, Inc., and Etsy. And then right behind them, Adobe and eBay came in around 5.5 months, and then just a little less for adoptive and fathers. So then there's also companies that offer some nice fringe perks. So this could really encourage employees to take their leave when they offer like above and beyond just paid weeks. So some companies are doing some really nice things. A lot of the top ones like to pay for your food. So Google, Yahoo, Fog Creek, they all gave credits in some form for food, and then as well as Pinterest did that too. Facebook was really nice. They gave just a $4,000 cash baby bonus, so that's a huge help towards new parents. And then Pinterest gave some other nice perks like coaching when reboarding the workforce, which can be a difficult time, credits towards Urban Sitter to help with childcare, and so those were some of the other nice top perks that we found. So then we think that there's other reasons why people might not feel encouraged to take their entire leave. One of them might be stock vesting. So some companies might offer you stocks or restricted stock units as part of your total compensation package. And some companies stop vesting your stocks or stop giving you any stocks when you go on this type of leave. So we found that 54% of the companies that were surveyed still gave 100%. So that was great that you weren't getting any sort of cut in pay when you were out on leave. But 22% stopped vesting. So depending on how much your compensation is tied to your company's stock, that could be a pretty significant pay cut while you're out. And then the other 24% were they had more complicated rules. Maybe they only vested partially or vested just for a portion of your leave. So overall, though, we're doing a lot better in tech than we are in the rest of the United States. So in the entire US, only 15% of the full-time workforce gets any sort of paid leave at all. And then the other 85% get no paid leave whatsoever. So there is FMLA that requires them to not take your job away if you can be out for up to 12 weeks, but that doesn't require any sort of compensation during that time. And then of the companies we surveyed, all of them, the minimum was 1 week. So the very lowest gave at least 1 week of paid leave. And then, obviously some of them were much more generous than that. So we think, even though we can do better, we're still doing pretty good in tech. And, that's a good place to start. So I'm going to hand it back over to Dave, who's going to talk about startups and then where we think we should go next.
All right. Audience participation time. Who here has worked at a startup or is working at a startup now? Okay, cool. This will be familiar then. The longer a company's been around, the more likely they have some paid policy on the books. So as little as 0 seed companies, and then almost by Series D, every company has some form of paid leave policy. As Nicole said, in our survey, we saw about everyone clocking in at least a week. What was a common thread in the survey is a lot of the respondents working at startups said they made stuff up as they went along. They really kind of just winged it. And, well, it's kind of like this. It's like no ops, right? Sometimes you wing, your operations, and you're like, we don't need operations. We'll just issue a bunch of AWS CLI commands and spin up some Lambda functions, and we'll call it a day. But it's really, that's kind of ragey for us, but you can kind of understand. But it's kind of ragey for almost anybody to have any of your benefits just kind of be up in the air. Like completely up in the air. You might go into work, you might say, hey, I'm thinking of starting a family, and then find out that there is nothing there for you. And your choices are really limited, especially when they're making it up as they go along, because that's where the door of, political favoritism starts opening up. And there really isn't a lot of guidance for what companies should do especially at these early stages, and especially even going back to the broader view of small companies. Just what they're supposed to do. Part of that is because of this map. Don't worry about the labels, look at the colors. If it's bluish, it means that there is some sort of leave policy in that country. If it's red, notable standouts here, United States, looking great as usual, has no leave policy whatsoever. And that's kind of a disaster, because then you get pie charts like this where only 15% of the workforce in the US has any type of leave afforded to them, and the rest are left without anything. And I've seen countless sad pull requests to our survey saying, yep, I work at this national laboratory, they give you nothing. And I'm like, wow, that sucks. There is some sliver of hope, and that sliver of hope is California, which gives everybody 60% paid leave for 6 weeks. And in San Francisco, that's a little bit higher because they ask companies to pay that difference, or they're starting to ask companies to pay that difference. So when you're gone for 6 weeks, you'll get your full paycheck. That's what we have to cover today. Please clap. This is parenting leave is a tire fire of sorts. If you want more information, we winged it and we put together a website at leavenot.vacations. It's one of the wonderful new top-level domains. Leave comments. You can reach out to us on Twitter, or you can reach us after this talk, and we'll be glad to answer your questions, or if you have questions now. Jennifer.
What would be key, 3 things you would
Besides, how was your vacation? Yeah, so Jennifer's question is, what are 3 things you would not want people to ask you when coming back from parental leave? And I said, well, there's obviously the one, how was your vacation? I don't know, Nicole, do you have any ideas? Seems like a personal preference.
I don't know. Did it hurt? Maybe, I don't know.
All right, you.
Yes.
Oh, one note about the Netflix one, that is for the Netflix Los Gatos, not necessarily the people who work in DVDs.
The comment is that I think anybody who goes to work for a startup should demand. See, the one thing you can find out is everybody outsources for so many services for HR, that you don't hire an HR person, and that can be a disaster. The easy example is not understanding how it is a worst case example could be not understanding sexual harassment, all those things. So I just wanted to say that for anybody who's a startup, you should just really force your startup to not make that short.
Let me repeat that because that's a good point. So the first question was about Netflix. Their leave is a paid leave for the entire year. The second comment was that if you are working at a startup or you're going to work at a startup, you should demand that they have these policies in place and that they have an HR department or some sort of HR facility. And this is actually a common thread that comes into like Model View Culture. If you read that, they say like you really need an HR department right away with your startup. We never say that. No, that's true. Warren.
So you guys collected any data? So sometimes there's like a period where like those benefits don't apply to companies. If you collected any data on how that affects things.
So we did have some people kind of leave in the comment section, like only after a year. So there are certainly companies that do enforce, you have to work here for a year before you get any leave, but we didn't have, we kind of just lumped them all together. We didn't have a good way to break those down a little bit more, but I think there were only a few people that had more complicated policies. Most of them were just, from the day you started, paid or unpaid. Yes?
I have comments about that, if it's cool if I can make a comment.
Sure.
Can I come up there?
Yes.
Of course.
I have feels about this, very big feels. So I'm pregnant, and it's given me a new insight into many things, like thinking about it. And every company should really take a look at that. You must be here for this amount of time, because it's basically inflicting a requirement that people cannot change their jobs when they're pregnant or if they're the father expecting, because we then are locking people into positions that may not be awesome for them. We already have interview processes that are really grueling on women who are going through experiences. And what happens if you get laid off? Are you all of a sudden not valuable if you don't live in California and can get the 60% required by the government? So please, if you're at a company where they have a leave requirement, talk to your HR and explain that this is not awesome. Thank you for letting me say these words.
I'll just expand upon that I'll really quick. So another side of that is that companies are missing out on awesome people. Like if you have a leave policy that would exclude, say, an expectant mother or a father who is going to be having a child soon, and then you cut those people out of your pool all of a sudden, like we all want to hire the top talent for our teams, right? And we don't want to exclude anybody. So just thinking of having to pay a little leave policy, well, think about how much it costs to pay a headhunter or train that employee. Like it's really a drop in the bucket compared to what it costs to get good talent. So, it's another way to think about it.
Have you noticed, what's the information that you found that shows companies that do not make a distinction between gender of parents and their leave policy? I'm sorry if I missed that slide earlier, but it's not. What's that look like? I mean, I'm a dude. I got not a lot of leave when my baby was born, and that made me sad. But is that normalizing at all?
So what did we have? About 70% were unequal.
Yeah, about 70% were unequal. I think the trend, though, is for them to equalize. In fact, when I quit my job, and then I wrote this blog post about this topic, and then a few months later, a former coworker texted me and said, I guess they read your blog post because now we have equal leave, and it's like 5 months. I'm like, cool. Wish I worked there, but not really. Yes.
Did you look at all at the behavior of managing your own fertility and making eggs or making sperm, or any change in behavior of the employee as a result of these policies?
Yeah, so we did add that to our survey of cryopreservation, whether the company offered that or not, but it was kind of a little early to gather a lot of insights on that, but we definitely think that's important to look at too. Yes.
Is there any discussion on benefits for parents, say, after the child, like post the parental leave period, maybe not necessarily time off, but other things in terms of people who are growing kids?
Yeah, so we think that's really important too, with the reboarding of the workforce, right? Because if you've been off for a few months and you just come back, it can be a bit of an abrupt thing. So we think it's we think a lot more companies could offer like some sort of coaching service or a flexible work environment, flexible work schedule when coming back. But I think only a few in our survey actually responded that they did offer that. Yes. Did you catch that? Sorry.
So like EAP gives, the employee assistance
Oh, okay.
offer some kind of like, not necessarily like structured, but just like personal type of, stuff. They have an employer, they tend to offer any of these, if that's somehow included in your policy.
I don't know that they are, but it's not something we've measured. And I think we need to end with questions because I'm getting the cane that pokes me.
Oh. Okay, thank you guys so much.